Why did a man who'd seen war still sleep with his gun under the counter? Maybe because peace never really stayed with men like Frank Reynolds. It just changed uniforms. The neon sign of Midnight Haven flickered like a tired heartbeat against the desert night. Out on Route 17, it was the only light for 40 miles, a lonely red and blue pulse cutting through sheets of rain. The asphalt glistened under the storm, the world outside swallowed by the Nevada dark. Inside, the diner smelled of old coffee, fried onions, and something almost sacred, the stubborn rhythm of survival. Frank wiped the counter for the third time that hour. Habit. Routine. The man had retired from law enforcement 5 years ago, but he hadn't retired from vigilance. 65, silver-haired, scar tracing his jaw, he carried himself with that quiet precision that soldiers never lose. His hands still moved like they were trained to deliberate, efficient, aware. The jukebox hummed in the corner, whispering Johnny Cash through the rain. Somewhere in the back, the soft clatter of pots and the faint hum of a woman's voice broke the silence. Sarah Mitchell, 28, the diner's cook, the reason Midnight Haven still ran smoother than most dreams. Frank glanced toward the kitchen window, saw her hair pulled back, the ponytail swaying as she moved between stovetop and sink, humming to herself. There was something old in her young eyes, a quiet endurance that reminded him of soldiers who'd seen too much and said too little. He checked his watch, past midnight, quiet shift just the way he liked it. Then he heard it. Engines, deep, rolling, hungry. The kind of sound that crawled into your gut before your ears even named it. Motorcycles, multiple, approaching fast. Frank froze, listening. He knew that sound. Everyone in Riverford did. The Midnight Riders, a club with more scars than sins. Men who'd seen both sides of the law and learned to live between them. Dangerous but not reckless, not without purpose. He holstered the Colt .45 beneath the counter, just in case, and waited. The rain split open as the first headlight cut through the diner window. 4 bikes. Chrome gleamed beneath the flickering neon as they rolled into the parking lot. When their engines died, the silence that followed was almost heavier than the noise. The door swung open with the jingle of a bell. They entered like a memory, leather, rain, and road dust. The air shifted. These weren't kids pretending to be outlaws. They were men built by consequence. Lucas Reed led them in. Frank knew him. Once upon a time, they'd worn the same patch, different branches, same code. Lucas had been a Marine back in Grenada. Frank had been the MP who pulled him out when everything went sideways. That kind of thing doesn't vanish. It brands you both. Lucas took off his helmet, dark hair streaked with gray, beard trimmed close, eyes sharp as glass. He scanned the room, door, exits, reflections, all in one motion. The kind of awareness you can't fake. "Even in, Frank," he said. His voice was gravel. "Riding late," Frank replied. "Storm caught us." "Storm'll do that." They shared a nod, not friends, not strangers. Something in between. Behind Lucas came Bear Thompson, a giant of a man whose hands looked like they could break bones or rebuild engines, depending on the day. Then came Doc Miller, lean, quiet, eyes that had seen too many wounds. And finally Jenkins, the youngest, still carrying that dangerous spark of invincibility. Sarah stepped out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, pretending not to notice the weight of 4 men and their shadows. But she didn't flinch either. She served them before. They respected her the way soldiers respect a medic, someone who saves lives without needing to draw blood. "The usual?" she asked. Lucas smiled faintly, appreciated Sarah. Frank watched her pour coffee, steady hands, soft voice, polite smile. Then she turned, and the sleeve of her uniform rode up just enough for Frank to see it. A mark, finger-shaped, dark, old enough to hide, new enough to hurt. And when she reached for the plates, the light caught her cheek, what makeup had tried to cover but couldn't. A bruise near the lip, small, precise, intentional. Frank's jaw tightened. He'd seen bruises like that before, dozens of times, from women who'd walked into his station, whispering stories they weren't ready to say out loud, from wives of men who wore the same badge he once did. He didn't need words. The truth was written in purple and yellow. He looked up, caught Lucas's eyes. The biker had seen it too. A silent understanding passed between them. A quiet, grim language spoken only by men who'd carried too many bodies out of broken homes. Sarah disappeared back into the kitchen. Frank poured himself coffee just to keep his hands busy. Outside, thunder rolled again, echoing off the desert hills. The storm was moving closer. Lucas leaned on the counter, voice low. "How long's it been going on?" Frank didn't look up. 3 months, maybe more, getting worse. Her husband. Deputy Mitchell. The words tasted like rust. The mayor's son. Yeah. Lucas's jaw clenched. Town won't help her, will they? Not against him. For a moment, neither man spoke. The rain beat harder on the windows. The jukebox crackled, skipping a line of the song before catching it again. "You remember Grenada?" Lucas asked softly. Frank froze mid-motion. "That night on the beach," Lucas continued, "you saved 5 of us, cost you your career." Frank shrugged. "Long time ago." "Not that long," Lucas said. "Man pays his debts, Frank, one way or another." Before Frank could answer, the bell above the door jingled again. An old couple entered, laughing quietly, shaking off their coats. The moment dissolved like smoke. Routine returned for a while. Sarah brought food to the writer's table: burgers, fries, a salad for Doc. She smiled like she'd practiced in a mirror, the kind of smile that keeps the world from asking too many questions. But Frank noticed how her eyes kept flicking to the clock. Nervous, expecting something, or someone. The rain turned to a downpour. Lightning flared white against the glass. Sarah flinched, almost dropped the coffee pot. "You okay?" Frank asked. She nodded too quickly, "Just tired." He wanted to press but didn't. He'd learned long ago, people only tell the truth when they feel safe. And in Riverford, safety was a rare thing. It was near closing when the door opened again. The sound wasn't a jingle this time. It was a slam. A man stood in the doorway, soaked in rain, the sheriff's star gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His steps were heavy, his posture uneven, drunk, angry, dangerous. Richard Mitchell. Even through the haze of alcohol, his arrogance burned clean. He scanned the room, and when his eyes landed on Sarah, they sharpened into something predatory. "Well, well," he said, voice thick with whiskey. "Look at this little gathering." No one answered. The room froze. Even the jukebox seemed to fall silent. He staggered forward, resting one hand on his holster. "Heard my wife was working late." His smirk twisted. "Real late." Frank stepped forward, calm, steady. "Called her in. Needed help. Storm kept the others home." Richard's gaze snapped to him, full of quiet hate. "That right, old man?" Frank didn't blink. "That's right." "Funny," Richard said, leaning on the counter. "Darlene says she wasn't scheduled. Guess someone's lying." Frank didn't move. Sarah stood behind him, silent, trembling. Richard's tone dropped low. "Get your things, Sarah. We're going home." Her voice was barely a whisper. "My shift, not over." "I don't care." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to make her gasp. That sound, small, involuntary, was the sound that broke something in Frank Reynolds. "Let her go," he said quietly. Richard turned his head slowly. "Stay out of this. It's between me and my wife." "Not in my diner, it's not." The 2 men stared at each other, one old, steady, unarmed, the other young, drunk, in uniform. The tension was a live wire. Then Lucas spoke from the booth, voice calm but edged like a knife. "You should listen to him, deputy." Richard turned, eyes narrowing. "This doesn't concern you, Reed." "You put hands on a woman in front of me," Lucas said, It concerns me. Richard's smirk faltered. You're drunk, Lucas continued. An armed bad combination. The air crackled. The rain outside felt louder closer. Sarah had stopped breathing. I'm the law here, Richard spat. You're just criminals in leather. Maybe, Lucas said, but we don't hurt women. Frank saw it, the twitch in Richard's hand. A second later, the service weapon was drawn, the barrel sweeping across the diner. Sarah screamed. Bear stood. Doc froze. Jenkins moved to shield her instinctively. Frank raised both hands slowly. Easy, son. Think about what you're doing. Richard's hand trembled, finger brushing the trigger. Then a voice, small, clear, innocent. Daddy. Everyone turned. In the doorway stood a little girl. Blonde curls, bare feet, a teddy bear clutched tight to her chest. Emma. Emma, Sarah cried. Baby, you shouldn't. I wanted to find you, the child said softly. Her eyes found the gun in her father's hand. Are you gonna hurt Mommy again? The words hit harder than any bullet. Richard froze. His mouth opened, closed. The gun lowered an inch, then another. What? No, baby, You do, she said. Her voice didn't shake. You hurt her. She cries when you think I'm asleep. Silence, pure, terrible silence. And in that stillness, Richard Mitchell, golden boy, deputy, son of the mayor, finally looked like what he really was, a coward with a badge. He holstered the gun slowly, eyes empty, shoulders sagged. He mumbled something that didn't matter and stumbled out into the storm. The cruiser's lights vanished down Route 17, swallowed by the rain. Sarah held her daughter and cried for the first time in months, not loud, not broken, just quietly, like a woman realizing she'd survived something that wasn't over yet. Frank stood at the counter, staring at the reflection in the window, the flickering neon sign of Midnight Haven casting his face in red and blue. For 30 years, he'd believed the law would always protect the good. Tonight, he learned again what war had already taught him. Sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes, justice wears no badge at all. Why do some nights refuse to end? Because when a man like Richard Mitchell points a gun at you, dawn doesn't bring light. It brings consequences. The storm had passed, but Midnight Haven still smelled of rain and fear. Frank Reynolds stood by the window, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the neon reflection bleed across the wet asphalt. Outside, the desert looked clean again, washed, innocent, but he knew better. Blood didn't always stain the ground. Sometimes it just stayed inside people. Sarah sat in the far booth, her daughter curled against her chest, both of them wrapped in a blanket from the supply closet. The little girl had finally fallen asleep, small hands clutching that worn-out teddy bear. Her breathing was soft, but Sarah's eyes were wide open, staring into nothing. Lucas Reed moved quietly around the diner, picking up broken glass, resetting chairs, erasing the traces of violence before daylight arrived. Every motion was calm, deliberate, a soldier's ritual after chaos. Bear swept the floor, his huge frame bent in silence. Doc poured coffee, his hands steady even when his mind was. Frank finally spoke, his voice rough. You should rest, both of you. Sarah looked up, eyes rimmed red. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see him. Frank nodded. Then don't close them yet, but we need a plan. Lucas slid into the booth across from her, the vinyl sighing beneath his weight. He'll come back, he said. Maybe not tonight, but soon. Men like him don't let go, they regroup. Sarah's voice broke slightly. He's the law. Who do I call when the law's the one chasing me? No one answered. Because they all knew the truth, in small towns like Riverford, justice had a last name. Frank exhaled slowly. We'll get you and Emma somewhere safe, somewhere he can't find you. Sarah shook her head. He'll find me, he always does. He knows my car, my routine, the neighbors who'll talk. Bear leaned his broom against the counter. Maybe he doesn't know us. The room went quiet. Sarah studied the men, four strangers bound by leather and loyalty. Outlaws, maybe, but the kind who stopped for strangers in the rain. She looked at Lucas. "Why are you helping me?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "Because you helped my brother." Confusion flickered across her face. "Last year," he said, "car wreck on Highway 14. You were driving home from the clinic, saw the bike down. You pulled him out before the gas tank blew. If you hadn't, he wouldn't be breathing." Sarah blinked, remembering the young man with the shattered leg and blood in his eyes. She stayed with him until the paramedics came. She hadn't even caught his name. "That was your brother." Lucas nodded. "Danny Reed, you saved his life." "I was just doing my job." Lucas's eyes softened. "So are we." The words landed heavy. Sarah looked away, swallowing hard. The bruises on her wrist had darkened overnight, like storm clouds that refused to clear. She rubbed them unconsciously, as if she could erase the proof. Frank poured another cup of coffee, his reflection wavering in the glass. "We can't stay here," he said. "By sunrise, he'll have every deputy in the county asking questions." Doc added quietly, "And the mayor will be spinning his own story before breakfast." "Then we move her," Lucas said. "Now." "To where?" Frank asked. Lucas's gaze drifted to the window, to the faint line of mountains against the horizon. "Your brother's cabin, up near Sawmill Creek." Frank froze. "How the hell do you know about that?" "James used to let some of the boys dry out there after rough runs," Lucas said with a ghost of a smile. "It's off-grid, no paper trail. No one but you and him ever registered it." Frank thought for a moment. The cabin was a relic, 2 rooms, 1 stove, miles from the nearest paved road. He hadn't been there since James died, but it was safe, hidden. "You think she can make it that far in this weather?" "She won't have to," Lucas said. "We'll take her." Sarah looked between them. "What about my daughter's things, her medication?" Doc raised a hand. "I've got contacts at the Carson City Clinic. I can replace what you need. In the meantime, I'll bring supplies." Bear nodded. "I'll handle transport. No one knows those trails like we do." Sarah's lip trembled. "You'd really do that for us?" Bear met her gaze, steady, honest. "My mom lived your story. Nobody helped her. I won't make that mistake again." Something in Sarah's expression cracked, not fear, not disbelief, but that fragile look of someone remembering what trust feels like. Frank went to the back office. The little girl still slept, breathing softly. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. 5 years old, too young to understand what monsters look like when they smile. He called softly over his shoulder, "Sarah, we're leaving in 10. Pack light. Take nothing that ties you to town." The rain had slowed to a mist when they stepped outside. Bear's truck idled near the side door, engine rumbling low. Lucas stood beside his bike, scanning the empty road. Every shadow looked like a patrol car. Frank carried Emma, wrapped in his old military jacket, the child's small head resting on his shoulder. She smelled like soap and innocence, 2 things Frank had almost forgotten. Mrs. Garvey lived next door to the diner. A widow, 70-something, the kind of woman who still left her porch light on for lost souls. She answered the door before Frank even knocked. "She's safe here," the old woman whispered, taking Emma gently from his arms. "Go do what you need to." Frank nodded. "You always were the brave one, Nora." She smiled faintly. "Bravery's just fear that stayed up too late." When he returned to the diner, the men were waiting. Sarah stood near the door, small duffel in hand, hair damp, eyes determined. The bruise on her lip looked darker in the neon glow. "Emma's next door," Frank told her, "sleeping." Sarah's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you." Lucas adjusted his gloves. "We move now. Storm gives us cover." They left through the back, tires crunching wet gravel. The town lights faded behind them, swallowed by the desert. The road to Sawmill Creek twisted through black pines and old secrets. Lightning flashed far off in the mountains, silent now, just light echoing light. The truck climbed higher, headlights cutting through the fog. Inside the cab, Sarah sat in the passenger seat beside Frank, her hands clenched in her lap. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of everything they couldn't say. "You were sheriff here a long time," she finally said. 30 years. "And you quit." He gave a tired laugh. "Didn't quit, just got tired of signing reports that didn't change anything." "Does it ever change?" she asked quietly. Frank shook his head. "Only when someone decides it should." She turned toward the window, watching the trees blur past. "When I met Richard, he was kind. Everyone loved him. The perfect deputy, the mayor's boy. I thought, if I loved him enough, it would stay that way." Frank said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like judgment. She went on, her voice small. "Then he started drinking, just a little at first, said it helped him sleep. Then it wasn't the drink, it was me, my tone, my cooking, my hours, everything." Her fingers traced the bruise at her wrist. "I tried to hide it, told myself it was stress, pressure, but when he hit me the first time, I knew." Frank gripped the wheel tighter. "Why didn't you tell someone?" "Who would believe me?" she said softly. "He's the law, I'm just the cook at a diner." Frank looked at her then, really looked, and saw the quiet courage behind the exhaustion. "You told someone tonight," he said, "even if you didn't use words." They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the cabin, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet pine and distant smoke. The small structure stood alone, wooden walls silvered by age, a single light flickering from a kerosene lamp inside. Kid Jenkins stepped out from the shadows, his rifle slung casually across his shoulder. "All clear," he said. Frank nodded. "Good, keep watch." The young biker grinned. "Always do." Inside, the cabin felt like a memory: rough-hewn table, stone fireplace, two narrow beds. Simple, safe. Sarah stood in the doorway, hesitant. "I don't know how to thank you." Lucas set down a small crate of supplies. "You don't, you just stay alive." Doc moved to the fireplace, lighting the wood. "I'll stay the night, check on Emma in the morning." Bear clapped Frank on the shoulder. "We'll take shifts outside, nobody gets through." Frank looked at Sarah. "He won't find you here." She met his gaze. "You can't promise that." "No," he admitted, "but I can promise he'll regret trying." For the first time, she almost smiled. By dawn, the rain had cleared completely. Mist drifted low through the valley, catching the first gold of morning. The world looked quiet again, untouched. Inside, Sarah finally slept, her daughter tucked beside her, small hand resting against her mother's bruised wrist as if to heal it. Frank stood on the porch with Lucas, watching the sky brighten. Both men carried the kind of fatigue that went deeper than bone. "You think he'll stop?" Lucas asked. "No," Frank said. "He's too proud. Men like him don't stop until someone makes them." "Then we'll make him." Frank gave a humorless chuckle. "You planning to start a war?" Lucas took a long drag from his cigarette. "Maybe just end one." They watched the light climb higher, painting the cabin in gold. The world was waking, but something darker was also stirring down in Riverford, in the sheriff's office, where a story was already being rewritten. A story where a bruised woman became unstable and a guilty man became a victim. Frank didn't know it yet, but by the time the sun reached its peak, Sarah Mitchell would officially be listed as missing and dangerous. And the hunt, the real one, would begin. He took one last look at the valley below and whispered, "Sometimes the law forgets what it was built for. That's when men like us have to remind it." Sometimes peace isn't quiet. It's the sound of people refusing to surrender. What happens when the law hunts the truth? In Riverford, it meant the morning sun rose over lies. The first light of day crept across the desert, painting the diner's sign, Midnight Haven, in dull shades of red and blue. Inside, Frank Reynolds sat alone at the counter, half a cup of cold coffee beside him, radio static whispering through the silence. He hadn't slept, not a second. Sarah and her daughter were safe, hidden miles away at the Sawmill Creek cabin, but safety wasn't peace. Safety was just a pause. He switched on the police scanner, a habit from years past, and waited for the inevitable. It came sooner than expected. All units be on the lookout for Sarah Mitchell and minor Emma Mitchell, last seen leaving the Midnight Haven diner. Possible mental distress. Mother considered unstable. Approach with caution. Frank's hand tightened around the coffee mug until the ceramic creaked. He didn't move, didn't curse, didn't even breathe. He just listened to the voice of the man twisting the story, Richard Mitchell. Unstable. That word would spread faster than any truth could ever run. In a town where gossip carried more weight than evidence, it was a death sentence with paperwork. He poured the coffee down the drain, straightened his shoulders, and reached for his jacket. The law might have turned its back, but he hadn't. By the time the breakfast crowd filled Midnight Haven, Frank looked like any other small-town diner owner, calm, collected, refilling mugs and wiping down tables. Only his eyes betrayed the tension underneath. They were sharp, restless, measuring every word and every customer. Carol Johnson, his morning waitress, 60 years old, sharp-tongued and unafraid of anyone, slid by with a tray of pancakes. 2 deputies came by earlier, she said quietly. Not your friend Richard, other ones, asking when I last saw Sarah. Frank's jaw worked. What'd you tell them? The truth, that she worked hard, left late, and deserved a damn day off. Frank almost smiled. That'll do. Carol snorted. You think I'm gonna help that snake? Please. My late husband was a cop. I know what happens when the badge starts thinking it's a crown. Frank didn't reply, but he felt a flicker of gratitude he couldn't voice. There were still people in this town who knew the difference between law and justice. He checked the clock. 8:47 a.m. The day had begun. Now came the harder part, pretending it was normal. Across town, Sheriff Tom Blackwood adjusted his tie in his office mirror. He was tired, always tired. Politics had eaten his soul years ago, but not his sense of right and wrong. When his deputy, Richard Mitchell, had stormed in an hour earlier, waving a report about his unstable wife and her kidnapped child, Tom had felt that old instinct stirring again. Suspicion. He'd seen women like Sarah before. Seen bruises that came with apologies written in police ink. And he'd seen men like Richard, golden boys who thought their family name was armor. He stared at the report again. Perfect grammar, precise detail. Too precise. Richard stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes cold. I want every unit looking for her, Sheriff. She's not well. She's got my daughter. Blackwood leaned back in his chair. You're saying she's dangerous? Richard nodded without hesitation. Unstable. You saw her last night, frantic, paranoid. I think she's delusional. I just want my daughter safe. Where was she last seen? The diner, Richard said, with a pause just long enough to sound rehearsed. Frank Reynolds' place. She took off right after I got there. Tom studied him carefully. Funny thing. I stopped by that diner last week. Didn't see any signs she was unstable. Looked like a woman just trying to make a living. Richard's jaw tightened. You calling me a liar, Sheriff? Tom exhaled through his nose. No, Richard. Just saying I've been at this long enough to know when something smells wrong. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Rain dripped from the eaves outside, steady, rhythmic, like a countdown. Richard leaned forward. She's not right in the head, Sheriff. She hurt herself once, took pills, ask anyone. Tom's eyes hardened. And did you help her, or drive her to it? The deputy's expression flickered just once before settling back into practiced indignation. I'm trying to do my job. You should try it too. When he left, Tom Blackwood sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The easy path would be to let it go, to follow the paper trail and look the other way. But he'd buried too many good people under easy paths. He reached for the phone. There was one man he trusted more than any badge. "Frank Reynolds," he said when the diner line picked up. "Got a minute?" The meeting happened at a corner booth 15 minutes later. Tom slid into the seat across from Frank, removing his hat. Neither man smiled. They worked together for 20 years, and the silence between them carried all the things they didn't need to say. "You got her out, didn't you?" the sheriff asked. Frank didn't blink. "Would it matter if I did?" Tom stirred his coffee slowly. "Richard got his father breathing down my neck. The mayor wants blood. He's already put out a statewide alert for the girl." Frank's jaw tightened. "That man's a danger to both of them." "I know," Tom said quietly. "But right now he's using the system, calling in favors, telling everyone Sarah's mentally unstable." "He's rewriting the truth," Frank said flatly. Tom met his gaze. "Which means someone else has to write it back." Frank frowned. "You offering help?" "I'm offering time," the sheriff said. "You get them out of Riverford, get them to Carson City. There's a women's shelter there run by Marina Diaz. Used to be a prosecutor. She knows how to make cases stick." "Roadblocks. Highways are covered, but county maintenance is fixing culverts on Old Mill Road tomorrow morning. From 6 to noon, that route's off patrol. You didn't hear that from me." Frank studied him, measuring the risk. "You sure you can live with this, Tom? Helping me means crossing your own man." Tom's eyes darkened. "Richard stopped being my man when he started using that badge to terrorize his wife. I won't protect that." For the first time that morning, Frank allowed himself to breathe. When the sheriff left, he took his hat but left behind a truth that settled heavy in the air. Even men who bend can still stand when it matters. Back at the cabin, morning light filtered through cracked blinds. Sarah stood at the sink, washing dishes in silence while Emma colored on the floor with crayons Doc had found in an old drawer. It almost looked normal, like a mother and daughter on an ordinary morning. But normal was an illusion. The radio on the table crackled softly. Bear Thompson's voice came through. "Doc, you copy?" "Go ahead," the medic replied. Patrol car came up the old ridge road. Didn't stop, but they're sniffing around. Might have spotted tire tracks. "Any drones?" "One high altitude. Could be coincidence." Doc looked at Sarah. "We're not taking chances. Pack the essentials. We may have to move sooner than planned." Sarah's hands shook as she dried them. "Where will we go?" "Carson City," Doc said. "Frank's making arrangements." She glanced at her daughter, small, fragile, drawing a son on the wooden floor. "I can't keep running forever." Doc softened. "No one can, but sometimes running is how you survive long enough to fight back." He meant it gently. She heard it like a command. By late afternoon, Frank arrived with supplies in the back of his old pickup. The road to the cabin was rough, the kind of trail you only found if you already knew it was there. When he stepped out, the smell of pine and smoke filled the air, the kind of scent that reminded him of younger years and harder choices. Kid Jenkins emerged from the trees, rifle in hand. "All clear." Frank nodded, carrying a box of groceries inside. Sarah met him at the door, her face pale but determined. "He's telling people I'm crazy," she said. "I know. And they'll believe him." "Some will," Frank said, "but truth doesn't die that easy." She turned away, staring out the window. "You still believe that?" "I have to," he said. "Otherwise, I'd have quit a long time ago." He set the box on the table, canned food, bandages, a small stuffed bear he'd found in the diner's lost and found. Emma spotted it instantly. "For me?" she asked. Frank smiled, found him wandering the diner, think he was waiting for a new home. The little girl hugged it tight. For a moment the room felt lighter. Lucas arrived shortly after, dirt on his boots, exhaustion in his eyes. "Richard, been busy," he said, dropping a folder on the table. "He got a warrant to search our clubhouse." Frank frowned. "What grounds?" "Anonymous tip claimed we were hiding drugs." "Did he find anything?" "Nothing to find," Lucas said. "But that wasn't the point. He wanted to send a message." Sarah's breath caught. "He won't stop." "No," Lucas said quietly, "but neither will we." The room fell into thoughtful silence. The fire crackled. The day dimmed. Outside, the forest seemed peaceful, but Frank could feel it, the pressure building, the quiet before the next storm. He looked at Sarah, the bruises fatting, the spirit beneath them hardening into something else. Resolve. And he knew, with grim certainty, that this wasn't just about saving a woman anymore. It was about saving the kind of justice the world had forgotten. As night fell, Frank and Lucas sat on the porch, watching the valley fade into shadow. "Old Mill Road's our window," Frank said. "Sheriff says it's clear from 6 to noon." Lucas nodded. "We move them at first light." "Bear and Kid will run interference," Frank added. "Doc drives point. I'll follow rear." Lucas flicked ash from his cigarette, eyes distant. "You think we'll make it?" Frank gave a tired smile. "We don't think we prepare." They sat in silence, the desert wind whispering through the pines. A coyote howled somewhere far off, a lonely sound, full of warning. Lucas glanced at the old man beside him. "You ever miss the badge?" Frank looked down at his weathered hands. "Sometimes. Then I remember what it turned into." He stared out into the dark. "Badges don't make men honest. Choices do." Back in town, Deputy Richard Mitchell poured another drink and stared at his own reflection in the bar's mirror. The man staring back looked hollow, angry, afraid. He didn't see a hero anymore. He saw a man losing control. He slammed the glass down, knuckles white. "She's mine," he muttered. "She's mine." Outside, lightning flickered again across the desert horizon. And for the second time in a week, Riverford braced for a storm. When truth runs, the brave don't chase it. They stand in its path. What does freedom sound like? Sometimes, it's just the hum of an old truck climbing a mountain road before sunrise. The sky over Sawmill Creek was still gray when they moved. Mist crawled low across the pines, and the air was sharp with that damp, electric silence that comes right before dawn. Inside the cabin, Sarah zipped the last of her daughter's clothes into a duffel bag, while Frank checked the map one more time, tracing a route with the precision of a soldier who knew what one wrong turn could cost. "Old Mill Road," he murmured. "We hit it before 6. Once we're past the ridge, we take the old logging trail down toward Carson. After that, no signal, no tracks." Lucas stood by the door, gear slung across his shoulder. "We'll make it, but if the deputies pick up our heat, we'll have to split." "Not unless we have to," Frank said. "No one gets left behind." "Even if it means getting caught?" Lucas asked quietly. Frank looked up from the map, "Especially then." Sarah appeared with Emma in her arms. The girl was still half asleep, her curls messy, her small hands clutching the teddy bear Frank had given her. "She's ready," Sarah said softly. Doc loaded the truck's back seat with blankets, food, and a med kit. Bear checked the tires, squinting at the sky. "Storm's moving east," he muttered. "Might help us. Fewer eyes in the air." Lucas frowned. Or more reason for drones to scan the roads. They all knew what that meant. The sheriff's department had recently borrowed state surveillance equipment under the pretext of fire prevention. But everyone knew who had requested it: Richard Mitchell. Frank locked the cabin door behind them, the sound echoing like an ending. "All right," he said. "Let's move." The truck groaned as it climbed the dirt trail, headlights cutting through fog and branches. The world was quiet except for the crunch of gravel and the low rumble of the engine. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, eyes on the road ahead, jaw tight. In the back, Emma slept under a blanket, her breath soft against the hum of the tires. Lucas followed behind on his bike, headlights off, just the occasional glint of chrome between the trees. Doc's van trailed further back, carrying supplies and options if things went wrong. They moved in silence for the first hour. Then the radio crackled. "Bear to base," came the low voice. "We got movement. Drone just went live over Route 7. Looks like a sweep pattern." Frank's grip tightened on the wheel. "Range." "About 5 miles south, heading our way." Sarah turned sharply. "They're looking for us." Frank nodded grimly. "Then we stay off-road." He veered left, tires skidding slightly as the truck bounced onto an old maintenance trail overgrown with weeds. Branches scraped against the doors. The forest thickened around them, swallowing the sound of pursuit. Lucas's voice came through the comm. "You sure about this trail, old man?" "I helped build it," Frank said. "Back before this land got forgotten. It'll hold." The air felt heavier now. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore, it was loaded, listening. Even Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something Sarah couldn't quite hear. And then the hum came. Distant at first. Mechanical. Cold. The sound of a drone sweeping low through the valley. "Eyes up," Lucas warned. "Thermals active." Doc's voice followed. "We're covered under trees, but if they switch to motion, we're done." Sarah looked at Frank, fear rising in her throat. "They'll find us." Frank shook his head. "Not yet." He killed the headlights, letting the truck roll forward in darkness. The world shrank to shadows and breath, every heartbeat loud enough to echo. The drone's sound grew closer, a hollow roar above the canopy. Through the windshield, Frank caught flashes of red light glinting between the trees. Lucas's voice came again, strained this time. "We got 30 seconds before they're right over us." Frank's mind raced. The trail ahead curved sharply left, a clearing beyond that, open ground. They'd be exposed. "Bear," he said, "you still got that smoke canister?" "Always." "Now." A second later, the forest erupted in a billowing wall of white smoke. It filled the air, thick and fast, curling up through the trees like ghostly fog. The drone's light wavered, lost its mark, swept aimlessly for a moment, then pulled away. Frank exhaled slowly. "Good thinking, Bear." Bear chuckled over the radio. "Always did hate being seen." Sarah turned in her seat, staring through the fog. "How long until they come back?" "Not long," Frank said, "but long enough." They reached the ridge just as dawn broke, a strip of orange fire cutting the horizon. The storm had passed completely now, leaving the world drenched in quiet. From up here, the valley stretched out endless, beautiful and full of danger. Frank stopped the truck near the edge of a bluff. "We rest here, 10 minutes." Doc pulled up beside them, his van sputtering. Lucas dismounted, scanning the tree line with his binoculars. "No pursuit on foot," he said. "But they've got checkpoints forming on Highway 12 and 23. We can't go back." Sarah helped Emma out of the truck, wrapping her in a blanket. The girl blinked against the light, eyes full of confusion. "Are we still running, Mommy?" Sarah forced a smile. "Just driving to somewhere new, sweetheart." Frank watched her kneel down beside the little girl. The tenderness in that moment, so simple, so human, hit him harder than any bullet could have. He looked away, swallowing the emotion that had no place here. Lucas joined him, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "She's tougher than she looks." Frank nodded. "They both are." Lucas exhaled smoke, eyes on the valley below. "You think this ends without blood?" Frank didn't answer, because deep down he already knew the truth. Nothing that starts with bruises ever ends clean. Back in Riverford, Sheriff Tom Blackwood sat behind his desk, staring at a list of patrol reports. Every line told the same story. No sign of Sarah Mitchell, no trace of the child, roadblocks cleared, search ongoing. And yet, something about it didn't add up. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. He'd been through enough manhunts to know when a search was a cover. Richard Mitchell wasn't chasing his family, he was chasing control. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. "Come in." Deputy Harris entered, young, nervous, clutching a folder. "Sheriff, I found something odd. The drone log from this morning." "Go on." Unit 47's flight path was redirected manually, not by dispatch. Tom frowned. "By who?" Harris hesitated. "Deputy Mitchell." "Did he file a report?" "No, sir." Tom's jaw set. "Then he's not searching, he's hunting." He stood, grabbing his hat. "Get the cruiser ready, we're heading north." Back on the ridge, the group was preparing to move when Lucas caught sight of something through the fog. "Movement." "South Ridge." He raised his binoculars and cursed under his breath. 2 SUVs, black, moving fast. Frank's pulse kicked. "Not deputies." "No markings." "Then who?" "Could be hired," Lucas said. "Mitchell's family's got money, private security maybe." Bear's voice came through the comms. "They're taking the old Ranger Road. They'll cut us off in 15 minutes. "Not if we move now," Frank said. He grabbed the truck door, calling to Sarah, "Get her buckled, now." The forest roared back to life as engines fired. The convoy moved, truck first, Doc behind, Lucas flanking on the bike, Bear taking rear guard. The path twisted, narrow and slick, branches snapping against metal as they descended toward the valley floor. Lucas's voice broke through static. "They're closing, 2 clicks back." Frank gritted his teeth. "Hold them off." Lucas veered off the trail, the roar of his Harley echoing like thunder. Sarah twisted in her seat, eyes wide. Through the back window she saw him, one man against 2 SUVs, sliding his bike sideways, kicking up gravel and dirt. He drew his pistol. 2 shots. One tire burst, sparks screech. The first SUV spun out, slamming into a pine. The second didn't slow. Lucas gunned the engine, leading it away from the truck deeper into the trees. His voice came through the radio, rough and urgent. "Go, keep moving." Frank wanted to argue, couldn't. He hit the gas instead, the truck leaping forward. Branches whipped past, mud sprayed. Emma cried out as the wheels bounced hard over a fallen log. Sarah wrapped her arms around her daughter, whispering, "It's okay, baby, it's okay." But it was not yet. Behind them, gunfire cracked, sharp, distant, swallowed by the forest. Bear's voice came through the comm. "He's drawing them off, go, go." Frank didn't answer. He couldn't. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back. But leadership meant surviving, not surrendering to every impulse. When they finally burst through the last stretch of trees, the land opened up, a wide, sunlit clearing leading to the old railroad bridge. On the other side lay the dirt path that led straight to Carson's border. Freedom, almost. "Bridge looks weak," Doc warned. Frank squinted. The wooden planks sagged, old and half-rotted. "Strong enough for 1 vehicle," he said. "We'll risk it." Sarah held Emma close as they crossed. The bridge groaned, boards snapping under weight, but it held. When the tires hit solid ground again, Frank exhaled. "Bear," he said, "you next." The big man started across. Halfway through, the radio cracked again, static, then Lucas's voice, ragged and breathless. "2 down, 1 still coming. Don't stop, I'll find you." Then silence. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Frank." He gripped the wheel. "He'll make it, he always does." But deep down he wasn't sure. By sunset they reached the edge of Carson County, the safe line. Doc parked beside the old water tower, engine sputtering. The little girl slept again, the exhaustion of fear finally winning. Sarah stood by the truck, staring back toward the mountains. The clouds glowed blood-red in the fading light. "He saved us," she whispered. Frank nodded, quiet, "for now." Bear joined them, face streaked with dirt and grief. "He bought us time." Frank said nothing. His eyes stayed on the horizon, where smoke still rose faintly against the dying sun. Lucas Reed had vanished into that smoke, one man against a system built on silence. That night when Sarah finally laid her daughter down to sleep inside a safe house on the outskirts of Carson City, she whispered, "We're okay now, baby." But her voice trembled, because somewhere deep down, she knew safety was just another kind of waiting. And back in Riverford, Deputy Richard Mitchell poured another drink, staring at a photograph, his wife, his child, and the man who had stood between them. He crushed the picture in his fist. "This isn't over," he said softly. "Some wars don't need uniforms, just the courage to keep driving through the dark." How long can one night echo? For Frank Reynolds, the answer was simple: forever. It had been 3 days since the bridge. 3 days since the forest swallowed Lucas Reed, and the sound of gunfire rolled away into silence. Now the world felt quieter, but not peaceful. Peace has a pulse, this silence didn't. Frank stood on the porch of the Carson safe house, a cigarette burning down between his fingers, watching dawn bleed across the sky. The desert looked endless from here, gold and gray and full of ghosts. Every sunrise brought the same question: had Lucas made it out? Or was he now another name whispered by the road? He'd seen men disappear before, soldiers, cops, friends. But this time felt different. This time it felt personal. Inside, Sarah stirred. Her reflection moved in the window, hair tangled, eyes still carrying the bruises her skin had already healed from. She was awake, but her daughter was. Emma slept soundly in the small room beyond, the teddy bear still tucked under her chin. Frank took one last drag and crushed the cigarette out against the railing. "Morning," he said softly as Sarah stepped onto the porch. She nodded. "You didn't sleep again?" "Not much to dream about." They stood there for a long moment, watching the horizon. Somewhere behind them, Doc was making coffee, the smell cutting through the chill. Bear sat by the truck, fixing a cracked headlight with the kind of focus that only grief brings. Sarah finally broke the silence. "He's gone, isn't he?" Frank didn't answer immediately. "We don't know that." She looked at him. "You don't have to lie to me." He met her eyes, and for a second the old lawman in him, the one who believed in clean endings and written justice, vanished. What remained was just a tired man trying to keep another human being from breaking. "He gave us time," Frank said quietly. "That's what matters." Sarah nodded slowly, blinking back tears. "He shouldn't have had to." "No," Frank said, "but that's what good men do. They buy others a chance." Later that morning, Bear and Doc loaded up the truck again. They moved twice since arriving in Carson, never staying more than a night in one place. The mayor's influence stretched farther than anyone liked to admit, and Richard Mitchell had money to burn. Posters were already circulating: missing child, mother unstable. Every lie printed neat and official, each one killing another piece of truth. Doc handed Sarah a small paper envelope. "New ID, name, Grace Holloway now, just in case." Sarah took it hesitantly. "Grace Holloway," she repeated, as if trying to taste a new version of herself. Bear grinned faintly. "You look more like a Grace anyway." She smiled for the first time in days. "Yeah, what's that supposed to mean?" "Means you've still got fight left," he said, "and that's a good thing." Frank checked his watch. "We meet Sheriff Blackwood at noon. He's risking his badge helping us. We do this clean." Doc nodded. "Shelter's ready for her and the kid. They'll take care of the paperwork, get new records started." Bear frowned. "And what about Mitchell?" Frank's expression hardened. "One thing at a time." At the women's shelter in Carson City, the walls were painted in soft earth tones, beige and lavender, like calm itself was being forced into existence. It smelled of coffee and hope. Marina Diaz, the director, met them at the door. Short, mid-40s, sharp eyes that had seen too many lies in courtrooms. She greeted Frank with a handshake that felt more like a promise. "You're the one Sheriff Blackwood called about," she said. Frank nodded. "This is Sarah and her daughter." Marina knelt to Emma's level, smiling gently. "You must be Emma. I like your bear." Emma held it tighter. "His name's Lucky." "Lucky," Marina said softly. "That's a good name. You can both stay as long as you need. No one will find you here." Sarah looked around, women of all ages, some cooking, some laughing, some sitting quietly with scars that had long stopped bleeding but never faded. There was something sacred in the normalcy. For the first time in months, she didn't feel watched, didn't feel hunted, just seen. "Thank you," she whispered. Marina touched her arm. "You don't have to thank me, just heal." That night Frank stayed in a cheap motel across town. He couldn't rest, but he could plan. On the table before him lay a stack of notes, maps, patrol routes, vehicle tags. The kind of intelligence you only gather when the law won't help you anymore. Bear came in quietly, 2 beers in hand. He set one down and sank into the opposite chair. "You think she'll be okay here?" "She's safer than she's ever been," Frank said. "But she won't be okay until he's stopped." Bear nodded. "Then we stop him." Frank looked at him. "You still think we're the good guys?" Bear chuckled darkly. "I think we're the only guys doing the right thing." The older man smiled faintly. "Fair enough." A knock on the door cut through the silence. Doc stepped in, face pale. "We've got news." Frank stood. "Lucas." Doc nodded slowly. "Alive, barely." They found him 2 towns over, in an abandoned warehouse outside Ely. Doc had tracked his location through a local clinic, where someone matching his description had been treated and disappeared before sunrise. When they entered, the smell of oil and blood hit first. Lucas lay on an old mattress, a gunshot wound stitched crudely along his side. His breathing was shallow but steady. Frank knelt beside him. "You dumb bastard," he muttered. Lucas managed a grin. "Took you long enough. You couldn't stay put, could you? Didn't want to miss the encore." Bear laughed, half relief, half disbelief. "Man, you're too stubborn to die." Lucas coughed weakly. "That's what my ex used to say." Doc checked his pulse, adjusting the bandage. "You lost a lot of blood, but you'll live." Lucas winced. "One SUV down, other one flipped in the creek. Guess that makes us even." Frank shook his head. "You bought them time, that's more than enough." Lucas's expression hardened suddenly. "You think this is over?" "No," Frank said. "It's just quieter now." Lucas looked him dead in the eye. "He's not stopping, Frank. Not until he's destroyed her or we destroy him." The words hung heavy in the air. There was no threat in them, no bravado, just a statement of fact. Frank looked away, jaw tight. "We'll handle it our way." Lucas smiled faintly. "Your way's slow, mine's faster." The next morning, Sarah sat on the shelter porch, sunlight spilling across her face. She looked peaceful for once, until she saw the newspaper headline that Marina slid across the table. "Deputy hero victim of conspiracy, wife missing with criminal biker gang." The article painted Richard as a man wronged, a husband betrayed, a deputy ambushed, his family abducted by former felons. It even mentioned Frank by name. The story was complete, the villains chosen, the hero crowned. Sarah's hands trembled as she read. "He's turning the whole town against me." Marina nodded grimly. "He's got influence, but lies don't last forever." "They do when they wear a badge," Sarah whispered. She stood abruptly, packing the small porch, her breath quickening. "I can't hide anymore. If I keep running, he wins." Marina watched her carefully. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need to fight back, on my terms." That evening when Frank came to check in, he found her waiting outside, coat on, determination in her eyes. "You're supposed to be laying low," he said. "I'm done hiding," she replied. "He's using the system to bury me. I need to use it to bury him." "How?" She handed him a small flash drive. "Every threat, every voicemail, every hospital record, I kept them all." Frank stared at it, small, fragile, and heavier than a gun. You kept proof. Because I knew someday I'd need it. He looked at her, really looked, and saw that something inside her had shifted. The fear was still there, but now it had armor. You realize what happens if you go public, he said. They'll try to tear me apart, she said, but maybe someone watching will finally stop being quiet. Frank nodded slowly. Then let's make sure you're heard. That night he called Sheriff Blackwood. The man's voice came through gravelly and low. You sure about this, Frank? Once it starts, it won't stop. Nothing worth doing ever does, Frank said. The sheriff sighed. All right, I'll make sure her evidence gets to the state investigator, but if the mayor catches wind, we'll both be out. Then we do it fast, Frank said, before he knows what's coming. When he hung up, he turned back toward the shelter window, where Sarah sat with Emma, helping her draw in a coloring book. The picture was simple: a small house, a sun, and 3 stick figures holding hands. Emma looked up. That's you, Mommy, that's me, and that's Uncle Frank. Sarah smiled. Yeah, baby, that's us. Frank stood there a moment longer, his reflection blurring in the glass, his thoughts a storm of guilt and hope. Maybe this was how wars ended, not with victories, but with small moments of peace earned by people brave enough to survive long enough to feel them. Back in Riverford, Richard Mitchell sat in his office, listening to the rain hammer the window. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. He opened it. A photo appeared. Frank Reynolds, Lucas Reed, Sarah Mitchell. Caption: They're still alive. Richard's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles whitened. Then so am I, he whispered. He poured another drink, his reflection fractured in the whiskey glass. This time, he muttered, no one gets away. Sometimes, the ones who break you are the same ones who teach you how to rebuild. How fast can truth travel when the road it takes is paved with fear? By the time the sun rose over Carson City, the air already felt different, charged, restless. The flash drive that Sarah Mitchell had carried, hidden, guarded, saved through years of pain, was no longer a secret. It was moving, quietly, relentlessly. Frank Reynolds sat in his truck outside the Carson County Courthouse, watching as Sheriff Blackwood's contact, a state investigator named Alina Cruz, stepped out of her unmarked sedan. Sharp suit, sharper eyes. The kind of woman who looked like she'd seen too many cases die in the dark. He met her halfway across the parking lot. You Reynolds? She asked. That's me. She held up the flash drive in a plastic evidence bag. You sure this is clean? Every bite, Frank said. Hospital logs, photos, voice messages. You'll hear him threaten her, more than once. Cruz nodded slowly. Then he's finished. Frank gave a tired smile. You sound confident. I don't get paid to sound scared, she said. But you should know, the moment this goes into the system, he'll know. His badge gives him that kind of access. Frank looked past her at the courthouse doors. Then we better move fast. At the women's shelter, Sarah watched through the window as Emma played in the courtyard, giggling with 2 other children. Her laughter felt foreign, bright, and fragile, like a language Sarah had forgotten. Marina Diaz joined her at the window. You did the right thing, she said. Then why doesn't it feel like it? Sarah whispered. Because courage never feels like winning, Marina said softly. It just feels like breathing after holding it too long. Sarah turned toward her. If this works, he loses everything: his badge, his job, his father's protection. Marina nodded. And if it does? Sarah's voice trembled. Then I lose Emma. The sound of the front door startled them both. Frank stepped in, followed by Doc and Bear, dust on their boots, urgency in their faces. It's done, Frank said. Evidence is in, state's taking it. Sarah's breath caught. And him? Not yet, Frank said. But he'll know soon. We need to be ready. Richard Mitchell did know, within the hour. He sat in his patrol car outside Riverford's town hall, scrolling through system alerts on his laptop. The notification was small, a data access flag. But to Richard, it was louder than a gunshot. Someone had pulled his file. Someone had touched her name. He slammed the laptop shut, chest tightening. The walls around him, his badge, his father's name, his authority, all started to feel paper-thin. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, his uniform wrinkled, his jaw unshaven. He looked less like a lawman, more like a man cornered. He started the car. The tires screamed against asphalt as he pulled away, every mile bringing him closer to Carson. Meanwhile, in the motel on the edge of town, Lucas Reed was standing again. Barely. Doc had worked miracles, stitching, cleaning, pushing life back into a man who'd left it leaking out on the forest floor. Now, bandaged and pale, Lucas moved slowly, one hand pressed to his ribs. "I'm fine," he muttered. "Liar," Doc said without looking up from his notes. Lucas managed a crooked grin. Wouldn't be the first time. When Frank entered, Lucas's grin faded. "It started, hasn't it?" Frank nodded. "Cruz took the drive to the state office. Once it's logged, Mitchell's done." "Unless he gets to it first," Lucas said. "That's why you're staying here," Frank replied. Lucas's tone sharpened. "Like hell I am. You can't even walk straight." "Doesn't mean I can't aim straight." The two men stared at each other, one tired, one broken, both stubborn. Frank finally sighed. "Fine, but you follow my lead." Lucas smirked. "Always do." At noon the storm hit. Not the kind that comes from clouds, the kind that comes from men who think they're untouchable. Sarah and Emma were in the kitchen of the shelter when the first car pulled up outside. Black sedan, no markings, too clean for the neighborhood. Marina's instincts kicked in first. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see the silhouette of a man stepping out, tall, broad, moving like someone who'd been in uniform long enough to forget how to walk like a civilian. "Richard." Sarah's stomach dropped. Her fingers went cold. Marina's voice was low but urgent. "Get the children to the back, now." Sarah froze. "He found us." "Yes," Marina said, grabbing the phone, "but he's not getting in." Richard walked up the path, rain starting to fall again, soft and steady. He didn't knock. He just stood there, eyes dark, hand resting casually near his holster. His other hand held a single piece of paper, a warrant. When Marina opened the door just enough to speak, he smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Morning, ma'am. Looking for Sarah Mitchell. She's a danger to herself and her child. I have a court order." Marina didn't move. "You have no jurisdiction here. This shelter is under state protection." "That's so," Richard tilted his head. "Funny, I am the state." He pushed the door hard. Marina slammed it back. "You're not coming in." His smile vanished. "You think a piece of paper and some volunteers can stop me?" Before he could move again, headlights cut through the rain. A truck pulled up, then a motorcycle. Frank Reynolds stepped out first, followed by Lucas, limping, pale, gun holstered but visible. Frank's voice was calm, but it carried the kind of authority that years of silence sharpen into steel. "That's far enough, Richard." Richard turned, eyes narrowing. "Well, look who crawled out from under his rock." "Funny," Frank said. "I was about to say the same. You aiding a fugitive now, Reynolds, harboring a kidnapper." "She's not a fugitive," Frank said. "She's your victim." For a moment, even the rain paused. Then Richard laughed, low, cold, humorless. "You think you're the hero in this story." "No," Frank said. "Just the man standing in your way." Behind him, Lucas drew his pistol just slightly, not threatening, just reminding. Richard saw it. "You really want to go down for her?" Lucas's smirk was thin. "Already did once." The tension crackled like static. Rain hit the pavement, Slow, heavy, deliberate, each drop louder than the last. Then Richard's radio crackled from his belt, a voice breaking through the storm. "Deputy Mitchell, report. You're to return to Riverford immediately. Internal Affairs needs you for questioning." He froze. The voice was Sheriff Blackwood. Frank saw it, the flicker of confusion, then anger. "Looks like your badge just called you home," he said. Richard's hand hovered near his holster. "You think this ends because some desk jockey called me in?" "No," Frank said softly. "It ends because you finally have to answer for what you did." Richard's jaw clenched. "She ruined me." "She told the truth," Frank said. "You ruined yourself." For the first time, Richard's composure cracked. The mask slipped. Beneath it, panic, rage, humiliation. The cocktail that breeds monsters. He stepped back, eyes darting between them, calculating. "You think you've won," he hissed. Frank shook his head. "There are no winners in this, just survivors." Richard hesitated a moment longer, then turned, stalking back to his car. He didn't slam the door this time. He just sat there for a while, staring at his own reflection in the rearview mirror before driving away. Inside the shelter, the tension slowly deflated. Marina locked the door and leaned against it, trembling with adrenaline. Sarah sat on the floor beside her daughter, holding her so tight it almost hurt. Frank watched them quietly, rainwater dripping from his coat. Lucas limped to the window, keeping watch. "He's gone," he said. "For now," Frank murmured. Sarah looked up, her face pale but resolute. "You think he'll stop?" Frank met her eyes. "No, but now he's bleeding. Men like him, when they start to bleed, they make mistakes." Later that night, as the storm cleared, Frank sat outside under the awning, the city lights reflected in puddles across the street. He lit a cigarette, the flame flickering in the breeze. Lucas joined him, moving slow, favoring his left side. "She's tougher than she knows," he said. Frank nodded. "She'll have to be." Lucas exhaled, the smoke curling upward. "You ever notice, the good ones never think they're strong. They just are." Frank smiled faintly. "Yeah, and the bad ones never think they're weak until the truth knocks." They sat in silence, the rain finally gone, replaced by the hum of streetlights and the quiet of a world waiting for dawn. Back in Riverford, Sheriff Blackwood stood in his office, staring at the empty desk across from him, Richard's desk. The warrant for his suspension sat unsigned. He finally picked up the pen. "For once," he muttered, "the badge goes where it belongs." He signed. But miles away, in a cheap motel off the interstate, Richard Mitchell sat on the edge of his bed, the TV light flickering across his face. He wasn't drinking now, he was thinking. The gun on the nightstand caught the light. Next to it, a printed photo of Sarah, Frank, and Lucas outside the shelter. He stared at it for a long time, then he smiled, slowly. Not the smile of a broken man. The smile of one who hadn't yet decided to lose. Justice may crawl, but vengeance runs, especially when it's wearing a badge. How do you stop a man who's already lost everything? You don't. You just brace for what he'll destroy on his way down. The night wind rolled through Carson's outskirts, whispering through alleys and broken fences. The city never really slept, it just dimmed its lights and pretended to rest. Somewhere in that half-silence, a patrol car sat abandoned on the shoulder of Highway 23. Door open, engine still running. Inside the glove box, a badge. Left behind like a confession. Richard Mitchell was gone. Sheriff Tom Blackwood stood over the car, rain dripping from his hat brim, flashlight sweeping the interior. His deputy Harris stood beside him, trembling slightly. "Where the hell did he go?" Harris asked. Tom didn't answer. He just stared at the empty seat where a man's conscience should have been. "Sir," Harris pressed. The sheriff finally spoke, voice low. "Wherever he's going, it won't be home." He reached in, picked up the badge, and turned it in his hand. The engraved name caught the light, Deputy R. Mitchell. "Get this to evidence," he said, "and get word to Carson he's not a deputy anymore, he's a threat." At the women's shelter, dawn came quietly, too quietly. Sarah Mitchell woke to the sound of footsteps outside her door, not rushed, not nervous, just deliberate, the kind of footsteps that carried intent. She sat up instantly, instincts honed by fear and too many nights waiting for danger to find her. "Frank," she whispered. No answer. She moved quickly, slipping on her jacket, checking the hallway. Nothing, just the faint hum of the building. Then a creak, farther down, by the side exit. She walked toward it slowly, her heart pounding. When she turned the corner, it was Frank. It was Marina. Phone in hand, voice tense. "You're up early." "I heard something," Sarah said. "So did I," Marina replied. "The sheriff called. Mitchell's gone, vanished after leaving his badge." Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. "He's coming." Marina didn't disagree. "We've called for extra security. Frank's on his way." Sarah's eyes flicked toward the window. The morning light felt thinner now, like it was struggling to break through. "He won't come at night," she said quietly. "He'll come when the world looks safe." By noon, Frank arrived with Bear and Lucas. The three of them looked like men preparing for a storm no one else could see. Frank's expression was carved from stone. Any sign? Marina shook her head. "Nothing yet, but Sheriff Blackwood confirmed it. He's off the grid." Lucas adjusted his jacket, the movement stiff from his healing ribs. "He's not running, he's hunting." Bear muttered, "Let him come. We've been waiting." Frank's voice cut through the tension. "No one gets reckless. We keep her and Emma safe. Everything else comes second." He turned to Sarah. "You ready?" Her answer came without hesitation. "I've been ready for years, just didn't know what for." Frank saw it in her eyes, the shift. This wasn't the same woman who'd walked into Midnight Haven months ago with bruises she tried to hide. This was someone who'd looked fear in the eye and was finally done looking away. That night the city lights bled orange against the clouds. The riders set up a quiet perimeter around the shelter, Bear in the alley, Lucas watching from across the street, Doc inside, ready for whatever came. Frank stayed near the entrance, an old shotgun resting against his leg. He wasn't supposed to be here anymore. Men like him, retired, tired, past their wars, were supposed to fade. But peace, he'd learned, was just another kind of waiting. Sarah sat in the dim kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. The clock ticked. Each sound stretched longer than the one before it. "Can't sleep?" Frank asked from the doorway. "Would you?" she said softly. He stepped in, nodding toward the empty chair. "Mind if I join?" She gestured to it. "You're the one with the gun." He smiled faintly and sat. "You remind me of someone," he said after a pause. "Your wife." He shook his head. "A soldier I knew, lost everything in combat, came back broken. Took years before she realized she wasn't a survivor, she was a fighter." Sarah looked down at her hands. "What happened to her?" "She learned to aim again," Frank said quietly. "But this time not with a weapon, with purpose." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was understanding. Half a mile away, headlights cut across the desert road. Richard Mitchell's rental sedan rolled to a stop just past the "Welcome to Carson City" sign. He sat inside for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, jaw flexing. In the passenger seat lay a small, folded photograph, Sarah and Emma, taken years ago. A happier time, a life frozen in ink. He reached for his gun, checked the chamber and set it back down. Not yet. Not like that. He wanted her to see him, to know. He looked in the rearview mirror, his reflection split by a crack in the glass. The man staring back was barely human now, just obsession and grief stitched together by arrogance. He started the car. Lucas saw the sedan first. Parked across from the shelter, lights off, engine idling. He reached for his radio. "Frank, we've got company." "License plate?" Frank asked. Lucas squinted through the scope. "Rented, Ely registration, he's here." Frank's pulse quickened. "Bear positions, Doc, get the kids to the basement." Sarah appeared in the hallway, her voice trembling but clear. "It's him, isn't it?" Frank nodded once. "Stay behind me." The tension thickened, the kind you could feel in your teeth. Outside, rain began to fall again, slow, deliberate, the sky weeping before the storm could start. Lucas moved first, slipping from the shadows, circling behind the car. Inside, Richard sat motionless, staring at the building like he was studying prey. Then his head turned slightly, eyes catching the faint glint of Lucas's rifle barrel. He smiled. Then he hit the gas. The sedan lunged forward, tires shrieking, slamming into the curb. Lucas dove aside as the car smashed into the shelter's front fence, wood splintering under the impact. "Down!" Frank shouted. Glass shattered, the sound of metal twisting filled the air. The front lights blew out in a shower of sparks. Then silence. "Bear, check him," Frank yelled. Bear moved cautiously toward the smoking car. He raised his gun, peered inside, empty. Door wide open. The seat soaked in rain. "He's on foot," Bear shouted. Frank spun toward the alley. "Lucas' back door, he's flanking." But before Lucas could move, a gunshot ripped through the night. One window exploded inward, spraying glass into the hallway. Sarah ducked, pulling Emma down with her. Frank dropped behind a table, scanning the angles. "Top left building, he's got elevation." Richard's voice echoed faintly through the rain. "You think you can hide her from me forever?" Sarah's hands shook, holding Emma close. "He's not stopping." Frank's voice was low, steady. "He doesn't have to, he just has to miss once." He signaled to Lucas with a hand gesture. "Flank right, get him in crossfire." Lucas nodded, vanishing into the rain. Frank turned to Sarah. "You need to get her out, basement now." "I'm not leaving you," she said. "You're not, you're surviving, go." She hesitated, then ran. Outside, Lucas moved through the rain, keeping low. His wound screamed with every step, but he ignored it. He circled behind the row of abandoned shops, scanning the rooftops. A flash of movement, second floor, right side. "There." He raised his rifle, steady hands, slow breath. The crosshairs found Richard crouched behind an air vent, gun drawn, searching for another angle. Lucas whispered to himself, "You shouldn't have come alone." He fired. The bullet tore through metal, grazing Richard's shoulder. The deputy cried out, rolled, fired back blindly. Sparks danced off brick. The rain turned the fight into thunder and smoke. Inside the shelter, Frank moved up the stairs, shotgun ready. He caught sight of the muzzle flash, left corner of the roof. "Lucas," he yelled. "Got him," came the reply. But Richard was fast. He dropped low, bleeding, snarling, animalistic. "Come on out, old man," he shouted into the storm. "Let's finish what you started." Frank stepped into the rain, slow, deliberate. "You first." The next few seconds unfolded like slow motion, a dance of noise and silence. Gunfire. Thunder. Footsteps on wet concrete. When it ended, only one figure stood. Lucas emerged from behind the building, breath ragged, gun smoking. He looked up, saw Frank on the roofline, shotgun raised. Between them, Richard lay on the gravel, not dead but broken, bleeding from the shoulder and thigh, still gripping his weapon like the badge he no longer had. Frank approached slowly. "It's over, Richard." Richard laughed weakly. "You think this fixes her, fixes you." Frank knelt beside him. "No, but it stops you." He reached down, hand steady, and took the gun from Richard's shaking fingers. By morning, the storm was gone. The city woke to sirens and headlines. Former deputy captured after night of violence. Shelter shooting ends in arrest. But for Sarah, it wasn't victory. It was something quieter. She sat beside Emma on the shelter porch, sunlight warming her bruised hands. Lucas stood nearby, arm bandaged, watching traffic drift by. "You did it," he said. Sarah shook her head. "No, we survived it, that's all." Frank joined them, handing her a cup of coffee. "Sometimes that's enough." She looked at him, tears soft but steady. "What happens now?" Frank smiled faintly. "Now you rebuild." She stared out at the street, the light, the noise, the ordinary world that felt foreign again. "I don't know how," she admitted. "Start small," Frank said, "one truth at a time." That evening, she watched the sunset with Emma asleep in her lap. The sky burned orange and gold, clouds drifting like smoke over memory. For the first time, she didn't flinch at the sound of engines or footsteps. The fear hadn't left, it had just changed shape. Now it lived beside something else, strength. She whispered, almost to herself. "He thought breaking me would make me disappear. He never understood breaking me made me real." Frank heard her from the doorway. He didn't say anything. He just let the silence carry what words couldn't. Some wars aren't won. They just end when the brave stop running. What does justice sound like? Not the bang of a gavel, not the roar of applause. Sometimes, it's just the sound of one woman finally exhaling without fear. 6 months had passed since the storm. Riverford had changed, or maybe it had finally woken up. The old Midnight Haven diner still stood on the corner of Route 17, its neon sign flickering the same tired red and blue, but something about it felt cleaner now, lighter, as if the walls had stopped holding their breath. Frank Reynolds stood behind the counter again, older by years that hadn't really passed. He poured coffee for a trucker who didn't know his story, didn't ask, and didn't need to. That was the beauty of the road. It forgot you kindly. The jukebox still worked too, faintly. Johnny Cash, same as before. But the man behind the counter didn't wipe the same counter 3 times anymore. He didn't need to. He finally believed the night could end. Downstate in Carson City, Sarah Mitchell, now legally Grace Holloway, walked up the courthouse steps, her daughter's small hand in hers. The morning light caught her hair, glinting off the silver pin clipped to her blazer. She didn't wear makeup anymore to hide bruises. She wore none because she didn't have to. Today wasn't about running. It was about finishing. Marina met her at the door holding a folder. "You ready?" Sarah nodded. "I don't think people are ever ready for this, but yes." Marina smiled. "He'll be there, shackled, don't let it shake you." "It won't," Sarah said softly. "I've already met the worst version of him." Inside, the courtroom buzzed, whispers, cameras, the hum of judgment. Richard Mitchell sat at the defense table, handcuffed, wearing county beige instead of blue. His face was thinner, paler. But his eyes, those cold, sharp eyes, still searched the room for her. When he found her, she didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She just breathed in, out steady as a heartbeat. The prosecutor, Elena Cruz, stood tall beside her. "The state calls Mrs. Sarah Mitchell." The walk to the witness stand felt longer than it should have, but every step was a reclamation of space, of silence, of self. She sat, placed her hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and met the gaze of 12 strangers who would decide whether her nightmare would finally end. "Mrs. Mitchell," Cruz began softly, "can you tell the court what happened on the night of March 17th? Sarah's voice didn't shake, not anymore. "Yes," she said. "He came to the diner, he was drunk. He put his hands on me. I thought that was the end of it, but it was. He followed me home. He always followed me home." Cruz nodded gently. "And you stayed because—" Sarah took a deep breath. "Because I believed love was supposed to fix things. I believed if I was kind enough, patient enough, quiet enough, he'd stop. He didn't." Her eyes flicked toward Richard. He looked away. Cruz held up the flash drive in a clear evidence bag. "Is this yours?" Sarah nodded. "Every file on it, every recording. I saved them because I knew someday no one would believe me. And why today? Sarah's voice grew quiet, because someday finally came. The courtroom was silent, even the air seemed to pause. Cruz turned toward the judge. No further questions. When it was the defense's turn, Richard's lawyer stood, nervous, pale, sweating through his collar. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, voice trembling slightly, "you've suffered, obviously, but would you say you're angry?" Sarah tilted her head, thinking. "No," she said finally. "I was angry for a long time, but anger's heavy. I gave it back." "Then what do you want from this court?" She looked directly at Richard. "Peace. For my daughter. For every woman in this town who ever thought silence would keep her safe." Her words landed like quiet thunder. After that, it wasn't about evidence. It was about courage. The recordings spoke for themselves. The medical records filled the gaps. The bruises she once hid had turned into proof that couldn't be erased. When the verdict came, it was simple. Guilty. Richard didn't yell, didn't plead, didn't move. He just stared at Sarah as the bailiffs took him away. That same hollow stare that once made her shrink. Now it made her stand taller. As the doors closed behind him, she finally let herself cry. Not from sadness, from release. Later that day, Frank waited outside the courthouse steps, leaning against his truck. When Sarah and Emma came out, he smiled, that rare, soft smile he hadn't used since his badge still meant something. "It's done?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "It's done." Frank handed Emma a small coin, old, polished military issue. "That's for luck," he said. "Carried it in every bad place I've ever been." Emma grinned. "Thank you, Mr. Frank." He smiled. "Keep it safe. Works better when you believe in it." As Sarah turned to him, she hesitated, then hugged him. It wasn't a long hug, but it was the kind that said everything words couldn't. "Thank you," she whispered. He shook his head. "Don't thank me, you saved yourself. We just cleared the road." She smiled. "Then let's hope it stays clear." Frank looked at her daughter, at the sun rising over the courthouse behind them, and said quietly, "Roads don't stay clear. People do." That night in the shelter's quiet office, Sarah packed her things, paperwork, photos, drawings. Marina helped, stacking files neatly. "You sure you want to go back to Riverford?" Marina asked. Sarah smiled faintly. "I don't want to go back, I want to rebuild. That diner still stands. It deserves better memories." Marina nodded. "So do you." Weeks later, the Midnight Haven opened its doors again. Same sign, same booths. But new laughter. New hands on the counter, her hands. Sarah ran the place now. The same woman who once hid behind the kitchen door, now greeted every customer with a steady voice and eyes that had learned not to look away from anyone. Emma helped wipe tables after school, humming the same song her mother used to hum to survive long nights. And when the jukebox played Johnny Cash, Sarah smiled, not because she remembered the fear, but because she remembered the men who stood with her through it. Frank still stopped by every morning. Lucas sometimes too, healed, scarred, quieter than before. Bear came once a week, claiming he just liked the pancakes, but everyone knew better. They didn't talk about that night anymore. They didn't have to. Frank would sip his coffee, staring out the window at the desert horizon. The neon sign outside still flickered, red, blue, red again, like the steady pulse of a heart that refused to stop. And every time he caught Sarah laughing behind the counter, something inside him healed a little more. One evening, as the sun set over Route 17, Emma climbed onto the stool beside Frank. "Mom says you used to be a sheriff," she said. Frank chuckled, "Something like that." "Did you catch bad guys?" "Sometimes." "What happened after?" He smiled, looking at her. "Sometimes you stop chasing bad guys and start helping good people stand." She thought about that for a moment. "That sounds better." "It is," he said. Sarah watched from the kitchen door, heart full. The girl, the old man, the diner, all pieces of a life rebuilt from the wreckage. That night after closing, Sarah stepped outside. The desert air was cool, the stars scattered like promises across a dark sky. The hum of the highway drifted faintly from the distance, engines passing, stories moving, life continuing. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let it out slowly. For the first time in years, she didn't look over her shoulder, didn't flinch at shadows, didn't wonder when peace would end. Because she'd learned something the hard way, peace isn't given, it's earned. She looked up at the stars and whispered softly, "For all the nights I thought I wouldn't make it, I did." And somewhere in the darkness, not in the sky, not in the sound, but in the stillness of the world itself, it felt like the universe answered back. Voiceover final lines, soft, reflective. Not every war leaves ruins you can see. Some just leave scars you carry quietly and learn to live with anyway. Some men fight with guns, some women fight with silence. But the bravest fight with truth. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.